From year to year, month to month, week to week, and day to day, people across the world are obsessed with a phenomenon that is professional wrestling. But why? 101 reasons to love professional wrestling. There are many components of professional wrestling that should be both understood and celebrated, in no particular order. Fighting all over. Not all wars are fought on the battlefield. It is not uncommon for a fight to not be in a structured environment. We all know wrestling excels in the four-sided ring. This is a standard that needs to remain for pro wrestling to, quite frankly, be pro wrestling. Without the four-sided ring, it's merely a badly acted action movie. Still, it's not hard to love well-built matches and rivalries that go the extra distance. In instances like these, it is not unheard of for a fight to end up, or even start, outside of the ring. The Falls Count Anywhere match makes the notion of fighting outside of the confines of the ring into an actual match stipulation. The roots of this match type goes back to at least the 1970s, but there is much debate about the first of its kind. There were performers like Bruiser Brody that would have wild brawls that would spill out to the ringside area. As soon as the televised approach to professional wrestling came into play, there has always been a fair share of backstage attacks that have left many rivals laying. This story arc building contraption is now a commonality of the presentation. In the modern landscape of wrestling, performers almost always take their fight to ringside. But over the years, it's not uncommon to see a fight in the crowd, in the stands, on the entrance ramp, or in random hallways. Fighting all over peaked on the mainstream level and was very common when the WWF had the hardcore title, where fights would go into random locations like outside the arena, in lakes, in bars, or even in parking lots. In the late 1980s, Antonio Inoki and Masashi Sato had a crazy rivalry that capped off with a crazy match concept. The two would square off in an island death match, a match where the two battled for over 2 hours on a legendary deserted island. In March of 1995, WCW's uncensored pay-per-view featured a King of the Road match between Dustin Reynolds and Blacktop Bully in the back of a moving vehicle. Then, at SummerSlam in 1996, the WWF saw The Undertaker take on Mankind in the iconic Boiler Room Brawl that started in the Boiler Room and went all throughout the backstage area on their way to the ring. There have been Hollywood backlot brawls, empty arena matches, and final deletions. There are many more examples of scrapping and obscure scenery, but one very entertaining instance stands out to most longtime fans. In December of 2001, the concept of brawling in obscure locations was taken to the next level. On a very memorable episode of SmackDown, Booker T and Stone Cold Steve Austin would brawl it out in a California grocery store. Yes, a grocery store. The two battled all over the store, giving the fans a true blue light special, while giving the clerks a bit to clean up on all the aisles. Every match doesn't need to be settled in this manner. A great match inside of the ring is always what will garner the most for the art form. But a great brawl is always going to be a great brawl, no matter where it is. The video games. Video games go all the way back to the 1950s, when computer scientists would design simple games and simulations just for fun. Video games would not enter the mainstream until the 1970s and 80s, when arcade games started to hit the scene. These coin-operated machines became popular attractions at malls and would engage the youth with digital spectacle. Of course, with anything new in pop culture, professional wrestling was right there to take their piece of the pie. The first major arcade release was Tag Team Wrestling, also known as The Big Pro Wrestling. This game was released in 1983 by Technos, a company best known the iconic Double Dragon series. There would eventually be other arcade games under the professional wrestling umbrella, but when the personal console came into play, the world of video games would never be the same. In 1987, WWF's Micro League Wrestling would enter the scene for Commodore 64 and one of the early versions of Atari. This first WWF home console game would tout the feature of exclusive digitalized video action. What this means is they had a list of moves to choose from, and based on what you chose, you'd see a very low resolution image on your screen. This sounds exciting as picking a pink color from a list and then watching it dry digitally. Then things got a bit better, 8-bit better to be exact. With the introduction of the Nintendo Entertainment System, we could now have actual matches in the comfort of our own home. This would start with 1989's WWF WrestleMania, choosing from Hulk Hogan, Andre the Giant, Macho Man Randy Savage, the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, Bam Bam Bigelow, and the Honky Tonk Man. Players would fight through the roster on the way to hopefully becoming the WWF champion. That same year, WCW Wrestling was released with their own roster of wrestlers, with the same objective of working through the roster and becoming the champ. Similar games would pop up every year or two. The likes of WWF WrestleMania Challenge and others would have minor updates of gameplay and a few different wrestlers added here and there, but ultimately, the coin-operated arcade games were still the best experience for fans. This would include WWF Superstars in 1989 and 1991's WrestleFest. WrestleFest would be considered one of the most popular and beloved wrestling games of all time. The roster was expanded from the WWF Superstars edition, but also more selectable match modes. Players could pick from the normal one-on-one matches, tag team matches, and the Royal Rumble mode that would feature a very entertaining Battle Royal. When the 16-bit Super Nintendo was released, more wrestling games were to follow. Other 16-bit SNES games would include 1993's Royal Rumble and then 1994's WWF Raw. These wouldn't be the only wrestling games for Super Nintendo. WCW had Super Brawl Wrestling. New Japan Pro Wrestling had Cho Senshi and Tokyo Dome. There was the first Fire Pro game, Fire Pro Women, All-Star Dream Slam, and a few different All Japan Pro Wrestling games, to just name a couple. During this time, there would be other games sprinkled in for other platforms, like WWF Rage in a Cage for Sega CD, King of the Ring for Game Boy, and other forgettable cartridge-based competition. PlayStation would then enter the scene, and life as we wrestling game fans knew it would forever be changed. In 1995, Acclaim released WWF WrestleMania, the arcade game. This game was ridiculous. The characters looked much better than the old games, but the gameplay was closer to an NBA Jam or Mortal Kombat. We're talking nonsense like Razor Ramon's arms transforming to literal razors, and Doink the Clown using a mallet that would manifest out of thin air. Yeah, this was amusing, but pretty bad. Acclaim would follow this up with WWF In Your House. Same nonsense, just more nonsensier. In 1998, things got back to normal with WWF Warzone. Released on PlayStation and Nintendo 64, this game had cage matches, the Royal Rumble, Tornado Tag, and now hardcore matches. Warzone featured 18 wrestlers, but most notably a Create a Wrestler mode that allowed the player to make up new characters or even attempt to recreate their favorites who were not included in the playable roster. Acclaim followed this up with WWF Attitude. It was an updated version of Warzone that had more characters, as well as the inclusion of the First Blood and I Quit matches. WCW would unleash WCW vs. the World and WCW vs. NWO World Tour, two games that had a more mature grappling system with a large array of characters. Many were WCW mainstays, but also huge stars from around the world with made-up names to avoid any legal ramifications. In 1999, one of the most popular releases was WWF WrestleMania 2000 for Nintendo 64, a game that had most of what was seen already in games before it, but with one of the most beloved game engines of all time. In 2000, WWF teamed up with THQ for WWF SmackDown. This would be the first of many to hit the shelves in the early 2000s. Story mode was a huge hit as players would be able to experience the life of a wrestler with backstage antics, feuds, and the goal of becoming champion. The SmackDown series would see many releases going into 2011. They would go from PlayStation to PlayStation 2 to PlayStation 3 as fans across the globe battled it out in a digital world of animated violence. Then the WWE 2K series arrived. Just as there were Madden football games seeing new releases launched every year, the 2K games had consistent updates. The 2K platforms would always reflect the times. If a new gaming system was being released, they'd be right on board with it. This meant we would see it go from PlayStation 2 to PlayStation 3, Nintendo's Wii, and Xbox 360. From there was a new wave of PlayStation 4 and Xbox One versions. As time went on, the games got a little bit better, and then a lot better. People can nitpick, and no games are perfect, but these games have always been fairly consistent in terms of fun and popularity. Over the years, there has been Fire Pro Wrestling, ECW games, TNA games, and a slew of other random but beloved in their own right wrestling video games. Some say it's a good creative wrestler. Some love the season mode, or even the entrances and arena variety. But professional wrestling games are here to stay as long as both video games and professional wrestling exist. And just like how vinyl has made a comeback, what was old has become new again. In 2019, game developer Retrosoft Studios announced that a sequel to the old WWF WrestleFest game was in the works. Retromania Wrestling brings the old school appeal of simpler times back with a game full of legends and independent stars, not under contract to the major companies. The buzz around this release has been great to say the least. If you're a fan of wrestling, who wouldn't want to select their favorite wrestler and square off against a friend in a battle of button smashing and occasional legitimate skill? Ultimately, they are just video games, so it's mostly a fun waste of time. At least with this waste of time, bragging rights are to be gained. Crying children. Crying is part of our natural makeup. It's a non-verbal communication of distress that often occurs the moment we are released from the womb. The endocrine system is triggered to release hormones to the ocular area. Translation: sometimes we cry. Physical and mental strength has no bearing in this. Everyone cries. Whether it's physical pain, emotional distress, an overabundance of elation, or something internal that just can't be described. For the most part, the reasons for crying are fairly obvious, and we should know and understand them. We are personally affected by something, and our body reacts. Sometimes, people are emotionally impacted by the arts. A masterful painting, a soul-wrenching song, or an extremely engaging movie will strike an internal chord that results in a teary-eyed surprise. In the movie A League of Their Own, Tom Hanks declares, "There's no crying in baseball." However, there is definitely crying in professional wrestling. Longtime fans of wrestling have seen this occurrence on numerous occasions. There's the typical moment when a bad guy upsets the children in the crowd to the point of drawing tears from their little faces. In the same respect, a child will be overcome with happiness when their hero finally overcomes their obstacles. But it doesn't end there. There are numerous moments when a fan will be overwhelmed with emotion. Emotions can be a wild and uncontrollable beast. We grow old and we become jaded people. However, when those involved with professional wrestling do their jobs right, they can manipulate the mightiest of people. It happens when a performer finally reaches their goals. It happens when one of our favorites is forced to hang it up and call it a career. It happens when a hero passes away. It happens when someone sees someone struggle through adversity only to become injured and taken out. It happens when we are impacted by the story of true love. We fans tear up, weep, or in the least whimper at the presentation in front of us. That's the magic. Just like the masterful painting, the soul-wrenching song, or the extremely engaging movie, we are deeply moved by the story and the careers of the performers we watch week in and week out. Professional wrestling brings out our inner child. You have to honestly ask yourself, if you've never felt yourself overwhelmed with emotion while following wrestling, then are you even a real fan of professional wrestling at all? Crowd chants. For as long as humans have gathered, there have been an exhibition of herd mentality. The conception of chanting crowds traces back to the dawn of man. There are chants against political figures, sacred Gregorian chants, or other religious recitations, and chants of warriors preparing, entering, or leaving battle. The historic utilization of chants goes on and on. One of the most appreciated and long-term venues for crowd chants is athletic competition. Spanish crowds chant "Ole" towards bullfighting. English football fans have their own organized salutes as well. There is the tomahawk chop used by the fans of the Atlanta Braves baseball team. Then there are a whole collection of crowd chants inspired by the ever so creative and passionate fans of professional wrestling that have shown up in other sports. Vulgar chants like "a-hole" or "BS" or the musical "na na na na," "hey hey hey," "goodbye," and a variety of others have begun in wrestling and then found their way into other sports. Professional wrestling has proven that virtually anything can be a crowd chant if it has an organized cadence. It's the electricity and the interactive camaraderie that create these moments. If there was a foreign wrestler taking on an American, chants of USA would overtake the arenas. The crowds of Extreme Championship Wrestling were just as extreme as the performers. The company has been gone for a long time, but when something hardcore goes down, the chant of ECW is always on the tips of the tongues of the fans resting on the edges of their seats. In the mid-1990s, it was never unheard of to hear the crowd chant "You effed up," "F 'em up, Taz, F 'em up," and even the now embarrassing chants of "She's a crack whore." These are just a few. But there were others just as vulgar, and some you'd be mortified to even ponder. That alone, chant along with a crowd. But there is a whole songbook of great chants outside of the standard boos and cheers. Over the years, wrestling fans have chanted along with the catchphrases of their chosen heroes. We scream in unison, yes, whenever Daniel Bryan races his two index fingers over and over. We woo along with the Nature Boy Ric Flair. We even have sing-alongs with entrances, whether there's words or not. There are dueling chants, where the crowd is split on who they want to succeed, or their collective opinion of a specific wrestler. We hear and shout, "This is awesome," when the crowd is appreciative of what is in front of them. Then there's always a chance of a boring chant, when the crowd feels a bit underwhelmed. On the contrary, a crowd will not be shy with a thrilling "Fight Forever" chant in the midst of an extraordinary match. Then when there is respect for a new champion, a "You deserve it" chant is not uncommon. If someone is retiring, we chant "Please don't go," or "Thank you" towards the exiting performer. If someone makes a comeback to the squared circle, a "Welcome back" chant can be called for. Or it could be the mere absence of a fan favorite like Ric Flair in '91 that brings out a "We want Flair" chant from the masses. Maybe the rabid fans are so in love with someone delivering a big move, they request for more with a "One more time" chant.
When the crowd sees a performer preparing to take a big risk, the chant of "Please don't die" can add a lot to the moment. There is even a "You still got it" chant, ready to be unleashed whenever an old-timer shows off their lingering skill set. If it can be chanted, the fans of professional wrestling will always find a way. If you ever find yourself in arenas for other sports, you will most likely enjoy the experience. But when it comes down to it, 100 wrestling fans chanting and popping is much cooler than even 20,000 fans at a hockey or baseball game waiting for something to finally happen. Gimmick matches. Once we start enjoying something, it's always inevitable for a little something extra to be added to keep us coming back for more. In the 1990s, moviegoers would love a movie and see it multiple times in theaters. But once the DVD came out, it would always include bonus scenes, director's commentary, and additional perks. Ice cream is delicious, but the extra whipped cream and cherry on top add a lot more excitement to the dish. Broadcast television was once the talk of the town, but cable companies came in and added extra channels to keep the viewing consumer happy. Bakers could sell a dozen donuts based on the deliciousness of the sugary pastry treat, but it's the baker's dozen that gives us that extra donut to indulge in. It is in our nature to want more, despite how much we do already appreciate something. Professional wrestling is no different. People who love professional wrestling matches, but sometimes a special match adds flavor to the already delectable dish. These specialty matches are essentially gimmick matches. A gimmick is exploited to sell, and these matches definitely accomplish that goal. In the earlier days of professional wrestling, a gimmick match would be included into the matchmaking mix, much differently than what we see today. The old mentality was when a long-term feud got so heated, they had no choice but to put two fighters in a special match to inflict more pain for the enjoyment of the paying crowd. The classics are street fights, cage matches, falls count anywhere, 2 out of 3, and even a strap match. Basically anything that's not the standard good old-fashioned one-on-one competition. Later on, wrestling would include ladder matches, battle royals, and even death matches. As time evolves, so does creativity. The WWE would introduce Hell in a Cell, tables, ladders, and chairs, Money in the Bank, elimination chambers, and a slew of other gimmick matches in an attempt to draw larger crowds and larger viewing audiences. Then there's the flip side of a gimmick match, one just being added for fun. In the past, fans of professional wrestling would see a first blood match or something just as devastating to settle a long-term rivalry. But now they just include a gimmick match, pretty much just to include one. There are an abundance of gimmick matches being used today without much rhyme or reason. Ladder matches are seen in many promotions, as are cage matches, no holds barred, and many of the classics. However, WWE has taken it a step further with their presentation of gimmick matches. Of course, the classic Royal Rumble match is always a favorite, but they've also included pay-per-views specifically promoting annual gimmick matches in the Elimination Chamber and TLC. The gimmick match was once a specialty and something unexpected that would be announced to add fuel to an already burning fire. But now, in current times, they occur for no reason and casually happen when the calendar calls for it. Regardless, when a gimmick match is great, it'll always be that extra whipped cream and cherry on top. Discovering new talent. There is a natural desire to be one step ahead of the curve. Everyone yearns to be on the cutting edge of everything. People flock to long lines to have access to modern technology. Those on the stock market invest based on the economic futures. Similarly, this is something everyone on all levels of fandom can appreciate. The world of professional wrestling is the same in many ways, especially when it comes to discovering new talent. Fans of mainstream wrestling on television who don't follow the independent promotions miss out on the evolution of someone's career on their way to debuting on television. These fans are exposed to new talent through vignettes and debuts, and they get to form their own conclusion if someone will be a blue chipper or not. In the pre-technology eras, the only real way to see someone outside of your local territory was through tape trading with other fans, reading magazines, or simply through word of mouth. Now, it is much easier to follow a wrestler's journey. We have access to companies who stream their shows, random YouTube matches, wrestling websites, and various other ways to absorb what is going on both nationally and internationally. This is an investment of time. We see someone gain momentum in the smaller companies and work their way up the ladder towards their goal of worldwide exposure. Independent fans of old were able to see the young up-and-comers like CM Punk and Colt Cabana work the circuit before landing in Ring of Honor and then beyond. Likewise, fans have seen the likes of Daniel Bryan evolve from the American Dragon Bryan Danielson to a multi-time world champion in the WWE. Fans have witnessed the likes of Teddy Hart gain momentum and then their stock plummets for various reasons and they never make it to a larger spotlight. However, most only saw Hall of Famers like The Rock grow from their modest WWF debuts with characters like Rocky Maivia and later become the most electrifying entertainer of all time. Most fans missed out on his teeth-cutting phase as Flex Cabana. Sometimes we have the opportunity to see someone like a Rob Van Dam rise through the ranks of ECW before landing in the WWF. ECW fans already knew he was the whole effing show, but it would take WWF fans a little longer to come up with the same conclusion. The WWE has recognized this phenomenon of following one's odyssey to the top and has turned their developmental league NXT into one of the most exciting shows in the current landscape of wrestling. On the contrary, sometimes a big fish in a small pond flounders in the bigger companies. Like any investment, not all will pan out. Not all will find their place on the big show. Even if you follow an indie performer from ring crew to world title status, or if you follow someone from WWE vignette to world title, discovering new talent is an enthralling, subsidized venture. It's just always cool to legitimately be able to say you were a fan of someone from the start. Grand entrances. The Queen of England, the United States President, and professional wrestlers all have many things in common. They have a large presence, take control of the room, and when they enter a room, people stop in their steps and pay attention. This is just a commonality of the nature of their characters. In professional wrestling, an entrance is vital. There are fireworks, videos, lights, loud music, and as much glitz and glamour of any given Super Bowl halftime show. And that's just a normal weekly Raw or SmackDown. WCW had the cool entrance tunnels that Impact Wrestling and later All Elite Wrestling would eventually copy. The simple brick wall entrance that ECW would use for years has been duplicated in a million independent promotion shows and is still out there in full force. However, there are times that a grand entrance is necessary for the bigger matches and events. At most WrestleManias, the entrance stage is so elaborate and grand that it rivals any live entertainment production out there. It's a spectacle in the pure sensation of the word. WrestleMania 3 had miniature ring carts carry the wrestlers to the ring. WrestleMania 12 saw Shawn Michaels ride a zip line from the entrance to the ring. Then in many WrestleManias, the wrestler's entrance would be performed live by an actual band. While there are many grand entrances from the history of WrestleMania, it does not end there. The Shield would enter through the crowd. NXT has had their share of great live performances and elaborate entrances prior to the big fights. And then there's the vehicles that are never out of the question. Legion of Doom came to the ring riding motorcycles at SummerSlam 92. D-Generation X entered with a tank at SummerSlam 2009. The Undertaker's entrance alone is magical and has been known to leave goosebumps on the fans in the crowd. But he has had some of the grandest entrances of all time. These amazing walks to the ring are not exclusive to Vince McMahon's company. Sting used to drop down from the rafters in WCW. New Jack's theme of Natural Born Killers would blare through the speakers as he ran out armed with a slew of weapons to beat people up. The Ice Cube and Dr. Dre's song would boom through the speakers the entire duration of the Bedlam. New Japan Pro Wrestling would highlight their biggest show of the year with awe-inspiring entrances. When there is a big fight, there are a lot of features that go into the big fight feel. In 2020, fans of boxing saw Fury and Wilder make grand entrances, but it's pretty safe to say where this inspiration came from. If someone has watched the highly creative art form of professional wrestling for long enough, they will surely have their own favorite grand entrance from the long, illustrious lineage of professional wrestling. Tassels. Fancy and glammed up clothing is nothing new at all. Elaborate garb has been part of history for many centuries. One of the featured pieces of this are tassels. Yes, we're talking about tassels. Tassels are a decorative finishing feature found on many clothing options from past and present. Tassels are in the Bible. They were worn by kings and queens and have been included in many military uniforms. While some of these ancient outlets for tassels are still in existence, unless you're in a circus, the theater, or gymnastics, there aren't many opportunities to wear tassels. That is, unless you're a professional wrestler. Be it on their jacket, arms, or their boots, it's always a fun visual to see someone flying around with a little extra flair. Tassels were a popular part of people's ring gear from the 1970s and 80s. If you watched wrestling during this time frame, it would be hard not to see the stripped fabric phenomenon. The Rock and Roll Express, the Rockers, the British Bulldog, Macho Man Randy Savage, and many others rocked the tassels. The Ultimate Warrior was an iconic wrestling figure known for his face makeup and being a wild persona. But would his famous rope shake had been as cool without the ruffling of his tassels? Probably not. Sadly, as time went on, the utilization of tassels would start to fade out. Sure, there was the likes of the franchise Shane Douglas wearing them on his boots, but the late 90s and early 2000s saw a tassel drought. In more recent years, they've been popping back up. The Young Bucks have a retro look that encompasses the fun of tassels. Tassels haven't completely went away outside of these superkick parties. Bayley's amazing face run saw tassels once again at the top of the card. Tyler Breeze, Paul London, and others in the current millennium have also had fun with the fringe. Just like the hair flying in the air for a big move or sell, the tassel is another little dramatic visual that adds to the performance. Trying it at home. Idolization is nothing out of the norm. Everyone wants to be like their heroes. There aren't many playground sport games that don't involve at least one kid in the jersey of their favorite player. Gatorade made an entire marketing campaign based around people wanting to be like Michael Jordan. This was the I Want to Be Like Mike commercials that aired a ton during the 90s. In the same vein, we toss up a jump shot and imagine we're making a shot in the NBA, like our favorite players. However, when you're a fan of the choreographed violence that is professional wrestling, we have been told for years, don't try this at home. Wrestling companies don't want the lawsuits of being a bad influence, but let's be realistic here. We definitely try it at home. In reality, no one should be attempting the big moves we see our wrestling heroes perform in the ring. It's dangerous, and we should not be hurting each other. At the same rate, kids have gotten seriously hurt riding bikes, playing on unsafe playgrounds, and eating bad things. It happens. It sucks, but kids do get hurt on their journey to adulthood. Professional wrestling is fun. Why wouldn't we want to try it at home? In the late 80s, the WWF released Wrestling Buddies. These were stuffed doll versions of the time's hottest stars. Even in the commercial, we are shown kids trying it at home with these stuffed characters. Then there are those on a lower budget who may have attempted moves in classic matches with their pillows. When you have siblings, performing moves on them is nothing unheard of. Be it big power moves or submissions, there is nothing like striking fear in a loved one with an ill-performed powerbomb on a bunk bed. A kid might find themselves in a professional wrestling-inspired war between friends in the neighborhood or school. Then there are kids who get a little more organized and a lot dumber when creating full-on backyard wrestling companies. In the late 90s and early 2000s, there was an absurd amount of backyard wrestlers performing the hardcore style wrestling as they saw on television. This would include big leaps, chair shots to the head, and ridiculous uses of weaponry. Thankfully, this fad has faded, but the world of backyard hardcore wrestling still lingers out there in some parts. No one should be getting hurt fantasizing about being a professional wrestler like the ones they love on television. But you cannot tell a fan of professional wrestling that trying it at home is not a lot of fun. The Spanish announce table. Once upon a time, the world only knew what they knew. We would blend in with our surroundings, and our life experiences were very limited. Thanks to globalization, the days of cultural isolation are over. We have taken advantage of technology and high-speed travel to understand, accept, and experience other lifestyles. The likes of Michael Jackson didn't just create music that his native audience would appreciate. He created music that everyone across the world would go on to love. If someone says the name Michael Jordan in any country, you will find fans of his amazing athletic feats. A great movie is a great movie, no matter if one is watching it in a language they know, or reading subtitles to comprehend the creative narrative. WWE's fan base spans all over the globe, and according to them, is a universe of its own. But the native language of the company is English. To cater to this universe of fans, the WWE has various commentators calling the action in different languages. One of the longest bilingual experiences is that of the Spanish announcers. They call the action for the Spanish-speaking fans at their own table at ringside. Whether you've watched wrestling for years or just months, you already know this because of the tradition of wrestlers destroying their table on a regular basis. The Spanish announce table might as well have a target on it. In most pay-per-views and many televised events, the superstars of the company will use it in their matches as a weapon. Going back to Bret Hart being launched through it by Diesel at the 1995 Survivor Series, this four-legged piece of furniture has seen copious amounts of destruction. Iconic Spanish announcer Carlos Cabrera's knee was clipped in the Bret Hart Diesel incident and still carries the scars from that experience today. Cabrera still calls matches in 2020 and has seen his table destroyed more times than anyone can count. The fans of WWE have grown to expect it to happen, and the Spanish announce table has become part of the show almost as much as the ring ropes themselves. Mick Foley fell off a cell onto it at King of the Ring 98. Shane McMahon uses it for his huge leaping elbow drop in most of his matches. John Cena has given him many attitude adjustments through it. The Shield dealt out plenty group powerbombs through it. Randy Orton is known to use it for his signature RKO finishing move. Even The Rock has dropped his share of opponents through it with the Rock Bottom. Fans of professional wrestling that are of legal age can vouch for this. The ongoing drinking game of taking a shot when the Spanish announcer table breaks has left many feeling mucho bueno.